Hello, Andy.
Hello, Ludwig.
Thank you for agreeing to participate in this interview.
It's my pleasure.
Uh,
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
you're a teacher, author, and photographer. You're known for your insights and perspectives on Dharma and on the mind. And you received the training at the San Francisco Zen Center under Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, and also under Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche. So also you had activities in Europe. You co-founded the first Shambhala Center in France and taught in Paris and on other Dharma centers in Europe. You are also the author of three books: Into the Mirror, which is the most recent one, and Contemplating Reality, and the Practice of Contemplative Photography. We can say, I think, that your primary focus is in teaching the Mahayana view and meditation, particularly on Mahamudra. So my first question is, could you share your journey into Buddhism, including the teachers and the influences that have shaped your your journey?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that a little. My earliest connection with Buddha Dharma was reading a book called Zen in the Art of Archery by Eugen Herrigel. And that was, it had a magical flavor to it that intrigued me. And then later I saw a lot of samurai
Mhm.
movies and was further inspired by this heroic ideal of the person who had mastered their own mind and became an extraordinary being. So this was childhood hero worship.
Mhm.
And somehow that led to my wanting to become a Zen master, not a Zen student, but a master. And I went to San Francisco in the early 1970s to try to study with Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. But when I got there, he was very ill, so I never got to see him teach. But I did learn to practice Zazen, or the sitting practice of meditation, at Zen Center. And after Suzuki Roshi died, a few months later, I met Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who became my main teacher. And I studied with him from 1972, I guess, until he died in 1987.
What give you the spark to teach, to write books, and to become a teacher?
Trungpa Rinpoche encouraged his students from the very early days to teach.
Mm.
When I first arrived at his center, the senior students had been practicing for a year or two and were already teaching. So this was the very early days of Tibetan Buddhism in the West. And he wanted us to take responsibility. So I started teaching fairly soon after becoming a student of his. I didn't have any ambition to write books until many years later. After Trungpa Rinpoche died, I studied with a man named Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso Rinpoche, who was both a wild yogi and a great scholar. And he presented the Dharma in ways that combine both this fearless, profound yogic approach and the scholarly approach of his tradition. And I found that there were things that he was teaching that were fairly unique, at least around the environment I was in, that he was providing instructions into how the teachings develop, how the stages of the path develop, how the stages of meditation on emptiness are practiced. So I studied with him, and after I'd been studying with him for about a dozen years, it became clear that there wasn't much of his style of teachings published. And I was concerned that his approach was going to be lost, and was trying to encourage some of my translator friends to produce books based on this, without much success. And one of my translator friends said, well, you should write the book. And I had not thought of writing a book before then, although I had done a lot of writing for various things. So my first book, Contemplating Reality, I wrote in 2004, 5, and it was published by Shambhala Publications in 2007. And that book was basically an expansion of Khenpo Rinpoche's teachings on the progressive stages of meditation on emptiness. So basically, I was trying to present the way the tradition explained these stages of meditation, but in a contemporary Western voice. So that was the start. And a little later, my editor at Shambhala suggested that I consider writing a book on contemplative photography. She knew I had been practicing that and studying it, and she thought that would make a good book. I did that. And then afterwards, I had an idea for a book, but didn't really have great insight into how to write that. And it took me about 10 years from the first instinct about writing that book to go through a couple of versions that I had to discard, and then write one that I felt really did communicate what I was interested in. And that was Into the Mirror. That became Into the Mirror. And Into the Mirror, it's an unusual or perhaps quirky book. It's not your traditional Dharma book, because it has some Western philosophy in it, and it combines things in ways that are not particularly either traditional or the way most contemporary presentations are given. So I've attempted in that book to give a very deep dive into the practice and study of the Mahayana in ways that aren't terribly traditional.
Can you, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
But
Sorry.
you mentioned the progressive stages of meditation on emptiness.
Yes.
And I have the impression that there is apparent contradiction here, because there's the fact that we have already a Buddha nature and there's a gradual practice to attain, to discover this Buddha nature. How can we reconcile this apparent contradiction?
Good question. I think the key is discovery, the term you used, or uncovering, that we are Buddha nature. That is the nature of our fundamental reality. We are also unaware of our own nature. It is covered over. The process of traveling the path of the Buddhist path is a process of uncovering, of discovering, of revealing. We're revealing something we always were, but did not recognize. So the progressive stages of meditation on emptiness involve recognition, gradual steps of recognizing that the things that obscure us, the things that cover the Buddha nature, have no nature of their own, that they are ultimately the Buddha nature themselves. So it's a gradual path of uncovering. An image that is often used for that is like peeling an onion, peeling the different layers of the onion. So you might have a first stage of meditation on emptiness that involves the most outermost skin of the onion. And when you peel that away, there's insight that reveals something, but there's still other layers that need to be removed or to be recognized.
What is emptiness? Can you give us a workable definition to know, to grasp a little bit what is it?
I'm not sure I can give a definition because it's experiential. It's something that needs to be recognized through our own experience. Emptiness the term emptiness is pointing to something about our own experience, that our experience seems to be very solid, very concrete, very lasting. The things we experience seem to exist outside of our minds in a permanent, solid way. Emptiness refers to the actual nature of those experiences, that the experiences are momentary and free from any solidity, any permanence, any independence. Another way of talking about that is to talk about openness, that the fundamental nature of our own minds and our own experience is openness, but we experience that openness as claustrophobia. So we experience our own minds as solid and substantial and driving us from one moment to the next. The reality is that those moments are actually free of what seems to be solid and compelling. And by recognizing their true nature, we gain freedom from that compulsion.
It's a theme which is developed in your last book, Into the Mirror. Could you share a little bit of the subjects developed in your book, Into the Mirror? There's 3 parts, and could you unpack a little bit what are these parts of the book?
Sure. Why don't I start by saying a little about the title? Because I think, to my surprise, the title is very helpful for understanding the whole book. The title came suddenly after a bunch of very bad titles, and it took me a while to understand it. But Into the Mirror is about distinguishing the mirror from the reflections. We usually spend our time chasing after reflections and running away from reflections. Those reflections that look like they will help us, we chase after. The ones that look like they might harm us, we run away from. So we are caught up in this chasing after and running away from reflections without recognizing the mirror. And by letting go of this hope and fear about reflections and relaxing into the mirror, we can be free. So that basic image of the reflections in the mirror is very important. The way the book unfolds, it starts with a section about cutting the chain reactions of samsara, cutting through the basic mistakenness and learning to just rest with our experience. The next section is about starting to see that we have this profound grasping at material existence. And this is very much a cultural phenomena that, due to the tremendous power of science and technology that seems to have amazing power over reality, we have come to a point where everything seems to be material. The mind seems to be a product of the brain, and so on. Happiness seems to come from possessing things. Unhappiness seems to come from having the bad things. So it becomes all about the material world and not about the mind. So this is deeply cultural from our modern world, but it's also deeply instinctive. And in order to begin to overcome that, we need to recognize that materialism is false, that it is not an accurate way of understanding reality. So in that section, there's a certain amount of Western philosophy to show that even within our modern world, our modern culture, there are challenges to materialism. And then the last section of the book takes these materialist challenges into the realm of Mahayana Buddhism and presents a way of traveling this path using meditation and reason, instinct and reason to travel the path. So it starts with a look at the middle way tradition and how Nagarjuna and his followers used reason to break down or deconstruct our clinging to things. And then it goes into further explorations of how the Yogacara tradition of Asanga and Vasubandhu look at how the mind produces this sense of solidity and duality.
Is there an ideal meditation curriculum to discover to discover in one's experience these findings?
I don't think so. I think, everyone's confusion is different. So everyone needs their own journey. And, there are a lot of different techniques that have been presented. You might find one technique very powerful for you and very effective, and another technique completely ineffective.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the fault of the technique, it's just whether it works with your own particular confusion or not. So I've tried to present what I think are really good methods for contemporary people. Some people have no interest in the kind of intellectual material that I present. Some people say, wow, this is just what I needed to understand. So yes, it's very much an individual journey, and you can find presentations of a path that attract you and that are interesting to you and that work for you. And then it's important to stick with them.
Mm.
But there's no one path that is suitable for everyone.
In some traditions, one can hear some teachers say, my path is the best one, and it's very freeing to hear that it depends on the meditator.
Well, everyone wants to study the best thing. So all the teachers say, mine is the best thing. And it's marketing.
Yes, and maybe marketing is important because it can, it's a way to show that something exists to the population, but maybe there's an equilibrium that can be found. And I've got another question on this topic of meditation. Is the practice of meditation alone sufficient to attain some realization on the path?
I guess it could be if you are motivated enough. I'm not that motivated. I need some intellectual guidance as well. I need to practice what I'm experiencing in my life outside of meditation. Traditionally, there are 3 trainings, and that's important because each one helps the others. Meditation is one of the 3 trainings. Study or philosophy is another one of the 3 trainings. And then how you conduct your life, the ethical conduct of living your life, is the 3rd training. And each one helps the others. So as you meditate, your understanding, your intellectual understanding can develop. As your intellectual understanding develops, your meditation can deepen. As you practice and study, your daily conduct should improve. And then the more your conduct and virtue develop, the less self-clinging you have, and the more you can open to the study and the meditation. So they work together. And, different teachers and different schools emphasize different parts of it. Like the Zen people are really into Zazen, into practicing meditation. That's a huge part of their tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the Tibetan schools emphasize the intellect and the study. But all 3 trainings are important, and no matter which you emphasize, the others will help with that.
And to go on with the ethical practice, there's a type of practice in Buddhism which is compassion practices. What is compassion? What is its role? And how can one develop it?
Compassion is the wish to help other beings who are suffering. And sometimes we talk about 3 stages in the development of compassion. The first is you have some empathy, you see someone having a difficult time, some living being, it doesn't have to be a human, and you want to help them. So it's sort of an instinctive level of wanting to help someone in difficulty. And that's the basic level of compassion. The next level of compassion is called the compassion for the mere appearance of beings. So once you have some insight into emptiness and the lack of substantial self and phenomena, when you see beings suffering, you don't take them as real and say, oh, I have this big project, I have to save this poor being. You recognize their insubstantial nature, but you also have insight into how they experience that they are experiencing delusion, they are experiencing pain, they are just experiencing suffering. So even though you are not caught up in the suffering anymore, and you're not caught up in their suffering, you know that you can help them. Even if they are illusory, you can provide illusory help to unwind their illusory suffering. So that's the second level of compassion, the compassion for the mere appearance of beings. And then the most profound compassion is what's called non-referential compassion. Compassion that doesn't have any reference points, but is just the radiation, the natural radiation of warmth and care that is part of the basic nature of the mind. And this is what Trungpa Rinpoche described as radiation without a radiator.
These stages are a byproduct of a practice, or it's something to develop?
I think it's both. There is a deliberate practice of taking to mind others, trying to focus less on yourself and more on others. So a decentralizing process. And that practice both comes from the basic meditation technique where you're letting go and engaging without rather than taking in. It can take the form of specific practices where you reverse the normal tendency of trying to get stuff for you and give the bad stuff to others. There's a practice called Tong Lin, sending and taking, in which you take in that which is painful, difficult, suffering, and you give out what is open and spacious and relaxed. So this is a way of reversing our normal clinging to ourselves and ignoring the needs of others. And then, as you gradually experience the openness and spaciousness of the empty nature of your own mind, then it becomes a natural and easy thing to experience warmth and positive radiation.
Is there really something that we can call final awakening or enlightenment or Buddhahood? Or I don't know what term to use, but is there such a thing? And is it for for everyone. And maybe can you say what is your perspective on what is this final realization?
I don't have a perspective on that. I can tell you from my own journey that it is possible to progress along the path, to have insight into our nature, to feel some liberation. But I think the idea of a permanent realization is like any other permanent things, that we don't try to cling to that. So I wouldn't say that there's some permanent solution.
Okay. And I've got a question which is linked to that. And how can one, on his part, remain grounded and avoid becoming ensnared in illusions or on personal achievements?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think we have to recognize that anytime there is insight, that you penetrate a layer of the onion, there will be clinging to that achievement. That's kind of a normal part of the path. We can't stop doing that because it's ego's nature to continually try to make everything an achievement. So if you know that, then when you have insight and you see and you recognize something and you start to cling to it, you'll recognize that too. And you can let that liberate itself. So probably the best thing is, first of all, to know that ego always wants to make any progress into its achievement. And so you know that that's coming. And then when it happens, to have a sense of humor about it, instead of getting frustrated and say, oh, I've done this bad thing again. You just say, oh, yeah, that's natural. And you move on. But yeah, I think, that has the potential to really slow down our path if we don't recognize that we are trying to make our journey into some sort of a spiritual triumph, and that we're something special because of that. That will slow down our path a lot.
Maybe the role of a teacher or a guide can be crucial here. And how can one identify? I know that it's a difficult one, but how can one identify an authentic teacher and avoid, even if it seems difficult, but avoid potential abuses within this relationship, which can be problematic sometimes?
Yeah. Well, it's important to look closely at a teacher before you really commit to being their student. And the thing I think you need to look for, a few things you need to look for. You need to feel there's some sympathy, some connection there. But you also need to see whether the teacher has a lot of self-clinging and self-importance or not. The best teachers are ones who have no self-interest, and it's visible. They are not either trying to gain recognition or protect themselves from criticism, but they're very open. I could say that the teachers I've studied with are very humble, even if they proclaim the Dharma forcefully in their own lives. They're very humble. They are not filled with themselves. They're not looking for students. They're not looking to make something special out of themselves. So I think, you need some sympathetic connection to the teacher, because if you don't have that, if you don't have respect and longing for that teacher, then it's unlikely that anything much is going to happen. You need to examine them to make sure that or to have some confidence that they are not filled with self-centeredness, that they have worked with themselves enough to release much self-centeredness. And then you need to see if they are able to penetrate your confusion, to show you your own mind.
Just to go back a little bit to some definitions, and I like the definitions. You talk about Mahayana and Yogacara. Maybe these are terms that not everyone understands or know. Can you just explain what is it for the people who come from other tradition, for example?
Sure. So early Buddhism evolved in India from the time of the historical Buddha. Over the next few hundred years, the community of practitioners developed, the practices developed, the teachings around those practices developed, and society developed. And all of this we call early Buddhism. Around the turn of the millennium, the beginning of the Common Era, new teachings appeared, which were, of course, attributed to the classical Buddha, but probably appeared to practitioners at that time. And the emphasis shifted a little. The emphasis shifted from the main concern of looking at individual selflessness, the lack of an ego, the lack of a permanent ego, to looking further, that it was not just the self or the ego that had no substantial existence, but also all phenomena were empty of that kind of substantial existence. So it was a period where people began to take the teachings further. It was not like they were discarding the early teachings, but they were bringing further insights to bear. And these insights were about the nature of the phenomena we experience, not just that those phenomena don't constitute a solid personal self, but that even the phenomena have no inherent nature, no solidity. And this became, later on, it was called the Mahayana, the great vehicle tradition. And one of the key figures in this was someone named Nagarjuna, who appeared in the 2nd century. And he wrote a very important foundational text called the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, the fundamental wisdom of the middle way. And this became known as the Madhyamaka or middle way tradition, but that was a later name that was put on it. Basically, what Nagarjuna did was he presented a series of reasonings to help people analyze their experience and recognize its emptiness, that it's freedom from substantiality. And these are very powerful techniques. The Madhyamaka, which is the tradition that comes from Nagarjuna and his students, is difficult. It challenges our assumptions about what is real. It deconstructs a lot of assumptions that we hold dearly. And it's difficult to practice, but it's very powerful as well. So earlier I talked about the three trainings, the trainings in meditation, the trainings in the view or the understanding, the study, the philosophy, and the training in conduct. So Nagarjuna emphasized the training in understanding and philosophy. And so his work and his tradition are extremely powerful for undermining our attachment to things, to the solidity of things, to our projections, basically. And this tradition continued to develop in India, and around the 4th or 5th century, a couple of other teachers named Asanga and his half-brother Vasubandhu took these teachings further, looking not just at the objects that had no nature, but also at the subject that was experiencing those objects, and showing how the subject as well had no nature. And this later on became known as the Yogacara tradition, the yogic conduct school. My own reading of this, my own understanding, which is a little different from the Tibetan tradition's presentation, is that the Mahayana was not a separate school that was in contradiction to early Buddhism, that Madhyamaka, or the middle way, and Yogacara, or the yogic conduct school, were not in contradiction to each other. That all of this was natural evolution of the way the teachings are presented. And it's not that some later teachers were more enlightened than earlier teachers, but that society had changed, that the Buddhist culture had changed in ways that allowed more powerful presentations, more, I don't want to say advanced, because, the Buddha in his initial teachings, whatever they were, obviously hit the nail on the head. He struck the vital points. He communicated the profundity fully. But the methods that people developed for communicating the teachings and helping others improve, just like you can say in Western science, the understanding of the material world has become more and more sophisticated, more and more powerful. And so I think the same thing happened in the Buddhist teachings, that they naturally evolved and became puissant, more potent, and more and appropriate to those times in ways that the earlier teachings may not have been. So I think what to me is very interesting in all this is not to view it as a clash between different schools or different traditions or different personalities, but more to see that each style of presentation has meaning and value, and we can apply that to our own experience and that by following a progressive approach to these teachings, we can deepen and deepen our own insight. You know, it's like one type of teaching might be really good for removing the outer skin of the onion, and another type of teaching might be valuable for the next layer, and so on.
At the beginning of the interview, I talked about Mahamudra, the practice. Do you have a perspective on this practice in the context of your teachings?
I do. Mahamudra as a tradition developed in India later on after the Middle Way and the Yogic Conduct School, probably a couple of hundred years later. There was a further movement away from the scholastic kind of tradition that had been developed at the great monastic institutions. And there was this yogic tradition that developed. And Mahamudra, which means the great seal or the great symbol, is one of the main traditions that developed at that time. So Mahamudra is, again, this issue of evolution of the teachings is, I think, is important. That Mahamudra takes the very fruitional approach of the Mahayana, where we are more interested in revealing Buddhahood than making it, and uses that as the starting point of the practice. So rather than working to gradually reduce the defilements that are obscuring Buddhahood, right at the beginning, you try to understand that all of those defilements, the nature of all those defilements, is luminous emptiness, that they are inherently free, and that all you need to do is recognize them. So it's a very fruitional approach, but it depends on having trained already in the previous stages.
That's really clear, and I like your way of presenting this tradition with few words, and it's really clear. Do you have a question that you would like to would have liked to answer that I didn't ask you?
Well, I'm enjoying talking with you, and I think your questions have been excellent. So I don't think I have anything else that I want to say, but yeah, I guess maybe the last thing I want to say is that I find this journey continually engaging and helpful to me personally. I very much love these practices and these studies. Sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's very frustrating, but sticking with it and engaging in this approach for long term is wonderful. And no promises that you will get some permanent great thing out of it, but the journey itself is really, I find, continually encouraging and exciting.
That's perfect. Okay, so we are reaching the end of this interview. I would like to thank you for the time and the energy that you gave us, and I will upload the video in a few weeks. I have to add the French subtitles, and I'm a slow translator, so it will take a little time. But I will make sure to notify you when it will be online. And until then, I wish you all the best and thank you again for this conversation.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your good questions. I appreciated this opportunity.